I'm 45 years old, and for 5 years, my phone stayed quiet on Sunday afternoons in a way that used to be the loudest silence of my entire week. Then one Sunday in February, out of nowhere, it rang. Olivia's name on the screen, no warning, no text beforehand explaining what had changed. I stood in my kitchen staring at it for 3 full rings before I found the nerve to answer, half convinced I'd somehow misread the name. "Hey Dad," she said, like it hadn't been 5 years, like we hadn't gone that whole stretch without so much as a birthday text between us. "What are you up to?" I don't remember exactly what I said back. Something about laundry, probably. Some ordinary Sunday thing, because my brain was too busy trying to process what was actually happening to construct a real sentence. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, her job, the rain, a show she was watching. She's called every Sunday since. Never once has she said the words I spent 5 years hoping to hear. Never, "I forgive you." Never, "I understand why things happened the way they did." Just Sunday after Sunday, her voice on the other end of the line, showing up in a way that turned out to mean more than any apology I could have scripted for her in my head. That first Sunday call came almost exactly 5 years to the week after the last real conversation Olivia and I had before the silence started. I still remember staring at the screen when it rang, genuinely unsure for a second whether I was imagining it. I'd kept her number saved under a photo from her 16th birthday, one of the last good memories from before everything between us went quiet, and seeing that photo light up my phone after so long felt almost disorienting. I answered on the 3rd ring, worried a 4th might send it to voicemail and I'd spend the rest of the day wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. "Hello," I said, careful, like the wrong tone might make her hang up. "Hey Dad," she said, easy, casual, like this was a habit we'd never actually broken. I didn't ask why. I want to be honest about how badly I wanted to. 5 years of unanswered questions sitting right behind my teeth, ready to spill out the second I had her on the line again. But some instinct, maybe just gratitude strong enough to override curiosity, kept me from pushing for an explanation neither of us seemed ready to have yet. I just let her talk about her week instead, grateful beyond words just to be hearing her voice again. If I'm honest, my first instinct hearing my phone ring that Sunday wasn't hope. It was fear. 5 years of silence teaches you to brace for disappointment before you let yourself feel anything else. My first thought, staring at her name on the screen, was that something must be wrong. An emergency, bad news about her mother, something serious enough to force contact she'd otherwise have kept avoiding indefinitely. I almost let it go to voicemail out of that fear, worried that whatever this call turned out to be would hurt worse than the silence had if it turned out to be some kind of goodbye rather than a reopening. I answered anyway, hands shaking slightly, bracing myself for anything. When it turned out to just be an ordinary check-in call, nothing dramatic, no crisis attached, I almost didn't know what to do with the relief. I found myself talking too fast, too eager, catching myself and consciously slowing down, terrified of somehow scaring this fragile new thing away before it had a chance to become anything real. I didn't ask her why she'd called after 5 years. I was too afraid the question itself might remind her she still had every reason not to. That first call stayed carefully surface level, the whole 20 minutes. Her new apartment, a co-worker she found annoying, the unrelenting Portland rain we'd both grown up complaining about our whole lives. Nothing about the divorce, nothing about the 5 years of silence, nothing about the specific things I know I did wrong during a custody battle that turned uglier than either of her parents should have let it get. I followed her lead entirely, grateful just to be included in her ordinary life again, resisting every urge to steer the conversation toward the apology I'd been rehearsing in my head for years, just in case this exact moment ever arrived. Near the end of the call, she mentioned, almost in passing, that she might call again next Sunday if I wasn't busy. "I'm never busy for you," I said, too quickly, probably too much emotion leaking into my voice for a conversation that had otherwise stayed so carefully light. She didn't comment on it, just said, "Cool, talk to you then," and hung up, leaving me standing in my kitchen, holding a phone that suddenly felt like it was carrying more weight than it had in 5 entire years. I didn't know yet if that Sunday call was a one-time thing or the start of something. I just knew I wasn't going to do anything that might risk it not happening again. The divorce from Monica in 2015 had gotten uglier than either of us intended it to, the way these things sometimes do when two people who used to love each other run out of better ways to express their pain. There was a custody battle that stretched on longer than it needed to, accusations flung in both directions that neither of us fully meant but couldn't seem to stop saying anyway, Olivia caught in the middle of it at 12 years old, absorbing more of the damage than either of her parents wanted to admit at the time. I said things during that period I've regretted every day since. Not violence. Nothing like that. Just the specific cruelty parents sometimes inflict on each other through a child old enough to understand every word. Olivia stopped fully trusting either of us somewhere in the middle of it, and by the time she turned 18 and got to choose her own level of contact, she chose less of me specifically, more than she chose less of her mother. I tried reaching out over those 5 years. Birthday cards that went unacknowledged, a few attempted calls that went straight to voicemail, a letter I wrote and rewrote a dozen times before finally sending it, never sure if she'd even read it. Nothing landed. I eventually stopped trying as hard, not out of giving up exactly, more out of not wanting to make the silence feel like pressure she'd have to keep resisting. I spent those 5 years in a kind of ongoing therapy, honestly. Individual counselling first, then a men's group that specifically dealt with the aftermath of high-conflict divorces, trying to actually understand my part in what had happened, instead of just quietly resenting how it turned out. It was slow work. I had to sit with things I didn't want to sit with. The specific ways I'd used Olivia as a messenger between her mother and me during the worst of it. The times I'd said things about Monica in front of her that no 12-year-old should have had to process. The years I'd spent more focused on being right than on being her father. My own father had been distant in his own way, growing up, and some part of the therapy work involved untangling how much of my behaviour during the divorce had been inherited. Without my realising it, patterns passed down that I'd sworn as a kid I'd never repeat, and then repeated anyway, under enough stress. Monica and I found some careful peace eventually, mostly through necessity, co-parenting logistics that outlasted the actual conflict once Olivia got old enough that logistics stopped being urgent. I never knew, through any of those 5 years, whether Olivia was watching any of my changes from a distance, or whether she'd simply moved on entirely, filing me away as a closed chapter. It took about 4 months of steady Sunday calls before I finally understood what was actually happening, and it wasn't through anything she said directly. I'd been waiting, quietly, the whole time, for some eventual conversation where she'd sit me down and either forgive me formally or tell me exactly what she still needed to hear before she could. I kept bracing for it every single Sunday, a script running in the back of my mind for how I'd finally deliver the apology I'd been holding on to for 5 years. That conversation never came. What came instead was just more Sundays. Steady, reliable, 20 minutes some weeks, an hour others. Never once touching directly on the divorce or the silence or anything that had happened between us. I mentioned this, carefully, to my therapist, still slightly bewildered by the absence of the reckoning I'd expected. She asked me a question that reframed the entire thing for me instantly. What do you think 5 years of committed weekly phone calls actually is, if not forgiveness? I sat with that a long time. Olivia wasn't going to hand me the words I'd scripted in my head. She was showing me something steadier, and I came to realize, far more meaningful than words could have been. A choice, repeated every single week to keep showing up for a relationship she'd have been entirely justified in leaving closed forever. The forgiveness wasn't a sentence I was waiting to hear. It was every single Sunday she chose to call. I used to think forgiveness had to arrive as a formal declaration, a specific sentence spoken out loud, closing the door on whatever came before it. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes the people we've hurt show us they've made peace with us, not through words, but through the quiet, repeated choice to keep showing up anyway. Olivia never once said, "I forgive you" to me, not in all these months of Sunday calls. She just kept calling, week after week, and I've come to understand that the calling itself was always the answer, spoken in a language more honest than any apology speech I could have scripted for either of us. If you're waiting on somebody to say specific words before you'll let yourself believe you've been forgiven, I hope this gives you permission to look instead at what they're actually doing. Sometimes the doing says more than the words ever could have anyway. Olivia's called every single Sunday for 8 months now. We talk about real things sometimes now, not just surface-level updates, her job stress, a relationship she's navigating, occasionally, carefully, small pieces of memory from her childhood that used to be too painful for either of us to approach directly. We haven't had the big, formal conversation about the divorce yet. I've stopped waiting for it the way I used to. Some Sundays, we get close to it, circling the edges of old wounds, and I let her set the pace entirely, grateful just for as much as she's willing to offer on any given week. Monica mentioned to me recently, in one of our now rare co-parenting logistics calls, that Olivia seems lighter these days, more settled. I don't take full credit for that. I just know I'm grateful to be part of whatever's helping. In whatever small way, weekly phone calls can actually change a person's life. My phone rang again this past Sunday, right on schedule. Olivia's name lighting up the screen the way it has every week for 8 months now. No longer a surprise, just a reliable, steady part of my week I've come to build the rest of my Sundays around. "Hey Dad," she said, same easy tone as always. "Guess what happened at work this week?" I sat down in my kitchen, coffee in hand, and listened, fully present, the way I've learned to be for every one of these calls. No longer bracing for an apology or a reckoning I don't actually need anymore. 5 years of silence taught me more about what forgiveness actually looks like than any apology I ever rehearsed could have. It isn't always a sentence. Sometimes it's just a phone ringing, faithfully, every single Sunday, and a daughter's voice on the other end, choosing you again, one ordinary week at a time. I don't need her to say the words anymore. She's been saying them all along, in the only language that ever really mattered.